I'd like to welcome you all to this Classical Dutch DVD. I really hope this DVD gives you a great weapon you can play against d4. I've had problems in my past playing against d4, but I was lucky enough as a 9-year-old to be taught the Classical Dutch by my dad. Now, my dad was quite a strong player, and he's played this opening all his life. He taught me this opening. I've been playing it for the last 20 years. Now, 20 years is a long time in our opening, so I do have a very good understanding on this opening. I've also been lucky that not many top players play the Classical Dutch. Now, you might be quite surprised by this statement, because nowadays a lot of top players play popular opens. A lot of players below that standard will follow these openings. The problem with this approach is that you have to keep up with theory, and theory is an ongoing daily thing you have to learn. One of the great things of the Classical Dutch is that as soon as you know the opening, that's pretty much all you have to know. You know the main ideas, you can follow these ideas, these points, and from there on you have a great understanding of the opening. What I've tried to do with this DVD, I've done a couple of things. I think the most important thing when you're trying to learn opening is learn the strategical points behind this opening. Now, you can learn the opening in parrot fashion, which a lot of players will do, but it's more important to know the main ideas. So you can have a gist of what you're trying to achieve in each position, rather than just parrot fashioning, putting out your moves as such, which a lot of players do, but they don't really know why they're doing this move. You've got to understand why you're playing that move. You've got to have the understanding behind that move. So I've structured this DVD mainly so you can understand the ideas behind that move. I think that's the most important thing when you're trying to learn anything in chess. So what we've done for each chapter, we've taken the main lines. We've started off with a couple of introductory games which have been played between top players. These games will demonstrate the main ideas you should be trying to do. The main pointers, the ideas that you should be coming out with, the way you should be thinking basically when you're playing this opening. After we've had a look at these games, we go on to the theory behind that particular opening. Now, the theory is obviously quite important, and another thing you're going to have an advantage with this opening is the theory. I've done a book on the Classical Dutch, which was a very good seller. Now, there's not much theory out there in the Classical Dutch. The stuff I'm going to come out with here is going to be updated, new to the point, very exciting, great material that no one else has published. Material that you're going to have an advantage over your players on. This material will help you get an advantage over the white players. It will give you a head start before the game's even started. So I really think this is a very good way for you to pick up a great and exciting new opening. We're even going to have a look at the typical middle game positions you're going to get in a Classical Dutch. This will come at the end of each chapter. So you've got an idea about the structures you should be aiming for, what kind of positions you want to get from the opening. Now, I think this is quite a rare occasion. I don't know many books or DVDs that go down this line, but this will give you a head start. It will give you an idea about what you should be aiming for. Well, I really hope you enjoy this DVD. Hope it gives you a good and new exciting opening you can try out. An opening you can play whenever someone plays d4 against you, and have fun and enjoy. What we're going to look at now is some basic strategic ideas for White's point of view and from Black's point of view. I think this part of the DVD is extremely important, because you have to get to grips with these ideas to know what your plan is when you're playing this from both points of view. Now, go over this part of the DVD a couple of times so you understand what you should be doing. Very important. We're not just going to concentrate on the moves, but the ideas behind the moves. So let's have a look at some of these. Okay, so we're going to start with a typical way the game will go, d4. Now, the first rule I'd like you to get to grips with is the e5 break. We'll get to a typical position where this is important. So let's say we continue with f5, g3. This is White's standard and most popular setup against the Classical Dutch. White tends to fianchetto kingside in order to stop Black from fianchettoing queenside. If Black can fianchetto his queenside bishop, this will often help his position. So this is why White will often continue with g3 on this move. To get the Classical Dutch, you can play e6 here. Knight f6 is another possibility. Bishop to g2. Knight to f6. Knight to f3. White's getting ready to castle kingside. Bishop to e7. White now castles kingside. Black now castles kingside. And in this position, White plays c4. Now, this is a position you'll get many times when you play this opening. Whenever I play the Classical Dutch, this position will pop up maybe about at least 60% of the time. So we're going to really concentrate in this position for this DVD. Now, black's next move is what makes it the classical Dutch. The Stonewall Dutch here is the move D5, which has been played many a time. To make it a classical Dutch, we played a move D6. And this is the standard classical Dutch position. So let's just have a look at this position. What is black trying to achieve from this move? Well, to start with, the main idea, as I said earlier on, is for black to play E5 at some point. This E5 move is an extremely important idea. Obviously, we can't play this move here because we'll lose a pawn. But we've got to prepare this idea. If we can get E5 in, we can get a very strong centre. Now, let's have a look at another possibility here. This is something that black should avoid here. If black plays knight to C6 in this position, we're making a mistake already. This is a mistake because it allows white to play a good move, which we should nearly always try to avoid. White can now play D5, which is a good move. In general, when white ever plays this move D5, black should meet this move with E5. Unfortunately, black cannot do this now because the knight on C6 is being attacked. So one rule we have to remember, we should meet D5 with E5. So this is another reason why D6 is played here. If white now plays D5, this helps black's position out because we can play E5, gaining a strong centre. Let's go back to the main position after D6. White nearly always continues with knight to C3 here, developing a piece. In this DVD, we're going to look at a number of possibilities here. We're going to look at A5, queen to E8, knight to C6 and knight to E4. Now, one of the lines I was recommending was knight to C6. Now, this is a slightly dubious line for the reason I just explained a minute ago. White can play D5, which is a move he should play, D5, attacking the knight, and black can't meet this move with E5. So a mistake that white often plays here in this position, and rather than going D5, which is a critical move, white often goes queen to C2. Now, a couple of international masters that even played this move against me. This is a big mistake. It plays directly into black's hands. What should black play here? Well, the whole point of the classical Dutch, as I noted earlier on, is to play E5. Very important move. Now, queen C2 does nothing to stop this move. So in this position, black can play E5. An ideal move, controlling the centre. If black can play E5, black should always try to play E5 in the classical Dutch. This is really one of the most important rules you should follow. E5 is the way to play. Play E5 if you can get it in. E5 helps because you get a good centre. It opens up the diagonal for the bishop on C8, and it gives you good attacking chances later on in the game. So a very typical idea. Another general idea we should go back to is white's idea of playing E4. Now, E4 is a move that we should try to avoid from black's perspective. If white can play E4, black has to capture on E4, then white will generally have the advantage. So what we should aim to do, we should aim to meet E4 with E5. Let's just take a look at an example of that. So in this main position, if we go back one move, let's say that black plays A5. This is a move that's been played quite often. It's one of my favourite moves here. Now in this position, a main idea is rook to E1. Now this prepares E4. And as I said, we've really got to try to stop this move E4 from black's perspective. Now let's say that black doesn't stop this move E4. Let's say he continues with a move like knight to A6. A bad move. This doesn't stop white's plan. Now in this position, white should continue with E4. And already white has an advantage. The reason for this, let's say that black captures on E4 here. White recaptures on E4. Black takes back on e4. White captures on e4. This is a typical kind of structure that you want to avoid from the black perspective in the classical Dutch. This is also a typical position that white should aim to get. White has an advantage here. The main reason he has an advantage is the pressure he has on the e-file. The pawn on e6 is very passive. Black's also very cramped in this position. It's very hard to develop, get your pieces out. So this is a position we really have to avoid going for. So a general rule, if we go back to the main position, is that black has to avoid e4 and black should aim to get e5 in. So that is really rule number one. Another thing we should try to do, we've looked at real basic setups where white fianchettos with his bishop on the king side. Now generally if white fianchettos earlier with his bishop on the king side, we can't play the move b6. So let's go back to the start of the game. We've really only concentrated on this fianchettoing. Now what happens if white doesn't fianchetto kingside? So let's say we start d4. Okay, f5. c4. This normally leads to the same sort of thing, it's just a different move order. Now pawn to e6. Let's say white now goes knight to c3. So he's delaying the development of his king side here. Let's say black now continues knight to f6. White plays queen to c2. So he's avoiding the standard setup. Now when you're playing chess, you should always ask yourself, why did my opponent play that move? It should be pretty obvious to you now that white now has two pieces controlling the e4 square. So we've got to try to stop this move e4. This push is very important. And as I said before, if we can stop this idea, we should aim to stop it. So how can we do this? Well, bishop to b4 is a very natural move. This bishop pins the knight on c3 to white's king. Now I had a game at the Isle of Man tournament against a Russian grandmaster. He actually lives in Sweden now. His name was Agrest. He's 2600, so he's a very strong player. It's an important game for me because I was going for a grandmaster norm. If I'd have won this game, it would have given me a great chance of achieving that norm. My opponent now played e3. So I figured that he's not going for this typical kingside fianchetto. So I had to think of another strategy here. Well, a rule I'm going to say is, if black can play b6 and fianchetto his queenside bishop, then it's often a good idea to do this move, because the bishop is much better developed on b7 than it is anywhere else. White continued bishop to d3. So he's getting ready to get his knight out and castle. I now continue my plan. Bishop b7, fianchettoing the bishop. He's got to guard g2, so white now played f3, guarding g2. I played c5, getting some counterplay in the centre. White played a3, attacking my bishop. I played bishop takes c3, forced to do this. We will go through the next moves quite quickly. We get to the critical idea I want to talk about. White played queen takes c3. I played knight to h5, an interesting idea, trying to start an attack on the king side, opening up queen to h4 possibilities. White played knight to h3. Queen to h4 check, an aggressive way to continue. The idea behind white's move is that he can block it at knight to f2. I now played d6, trying to consolidate my centre. White took on c5. I recaptured back with my b-pawn. b4 now happened. I developed my last piece, knight to d7, bishop to e2. Rather a bit too quiet, that move. I don't think it's a very good move. I castled. White now castled. Now this is the position I really wanted to get to here, because it explains another rule that you can bear in mind when you're playing the Dutch. Now I have quite a lot of pieces here around the white king, but as we saw in the first game, in the introduction, Richard Pert's game, you really need 3 pieces when you're attacking your opponent's king. So how can black get another piece into attack here? We can see we have a queen on h4 and a knight on h5 dangerously placed. Let's bring another piece around to attack the white king. How can we do that? Well, the correct move is rook to f6. A very good move. And now the combination of black's pieces worked very well. We'll soon see that this rook on f6 and the bishop on b7 work extremely well together. Good combination. I'll just show you a couple of moves. It went knight to h3, rook to g6, aiming against white king. Knight to f4. Eventually, after repetition, I took on f4. White's recaptured back. And now I started hacking on the h-file. So rook to h6, lining up against h2. Black has to guard this. Pawn to h3. Rook to g6, threatening queen takes h3. King to h1. So my idea here is just to keep attacking every move. This is one of the great ways, one of the great things you'll get in the Dutch, keep attacking. So much fun to play. Queen to g3, threatening checkmate on g2. White had to defend. Rook to g1, only way to defend queen takes g2 checkmate. I came back again. I remember what the Russians used to say is if you can repeat a position, it shows that you're in total control of the game. So by repeating here, if my opponent moved his rook away, it shows I'm controlling the position. Instead, my opponent moved his rook to d1. So I brought another piece around into the attack. Knight to f6. And we've got a very good attacking position here. White played queen to e1, trying to swap the queens off. But after my next move, he's in a lot of trouble. I played rook takes h3 check. Now, I'm not going to go into any deeper than that because I want you to have a think for yourself how I continued this attack. I'll give you a hint. The bishop on b7 was very important. And basically the knight came to g4 with a massive attack. So let's just go over those rules again. We came across 4 basic rules there. Now, I'll just set the position up again, and I want to explain those 4 rules again that you should bear in mind. Now, the Dutch is really a battle for the centre. If you get control of the centre of the board, that means you can start attacking in other areas of the board. White normally aims to attack in the centre and the queen side, while black aims to attack on the king side. So, rule number 1, I'd say, if white can achieve the e4 advance, which we saw in one game, and black can't play e5 to counter it, then white will generally obtain an advantage. So really, in the classical position, so let's say we get to a classical position where white decides to fianchetto, the standard position is reached after 7 moves. As such, if white can achieve this e4 break, then he's going to gain an advantage. This is a move we have to avoid. So, e4, a move we have to avoid. A move that white has to avoid is the move e5. If black can achieve the e5 advance, black will generally at least be equal, if not better. So black should always be aiming for this e5 advance. Another thing we should avoid doing. Well, we really have to meet d5 with e5. So don't play knight to c6 too early. That's another rule you have to bear in mind. So I'd say rule number 1, try to avoid e4. Rule number 2, try to play e5. Rule number 3, meet d5 with e5. And the last rule is to play this fianchetto of the queen side if we can get it in. So I hope that's given you a general idea about your basic strategic ideas. We're going to have a look at some games now and the theory of this opening.